All right, we're now live. This is the Humanists Take on the World, formerly known as Atheist Nomads, 10-year anniversary live stream. We haven't done a live stream in quite a while, so it's nice to do one again.
Yeah, this is
And,
more of a celebration of you doing 10 years, not Humanists Take on the World.
well,
But
yeah, I've been podcasting for 10 years now.
all right, cheers.
Well, as of recording on May 21, it's 2 days before the 1-year anniversary.
Okay.
But we'll get to that more after we fully start. So, Humanists Take on the World, Episode 9, White Saturation. Humanists Take on... welcome to another episode of Humanists Take on the World. I am Dustin, and joining me is Lauren.
Hello.
And this week is the celebration of me podcasting for 10 years.
A decade.
Full decade.
Yeah.
Yep. Atheist Nomads episode 1, since that's where I count the starting point, was released on May 23, 2012.
God, that's a lifetime ago.
So it has now been a full 10 years. We are doing this live. I don't know if anybody's going to watch. At this point, there isn't.
Good, less pressure.
Yeah. But it is available live, and it will be available after the fact. We're trying out a new service for this called StreamYard, which allows live chat right in the monitoring window,
Oh, nice.
which should be pretty handy, and also just less effort to manage than what I've done in the relatively recent years.
Yeah. Oh, that's important.
Having done this for 10 years, I've done it a bunch of different ways. This is closest to the original from Google Hangouts on Air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the original idea for this episode was going to be a retrospective looking back on the top issues of the last 10 years and is it better or worse? And the answer, now, of course, that was the original idea. Then
What was your conclusion for that?
we'll get there.
Okay.
Then Lauren and I had a discussion that ended with me being late getting back to work because I got into a very heated and passionate rant.
His lip was twitching. He was
Yes.
so into it. I'm like, oh boy.
So this is going to be fun. So we're going to do that instead. But for the conclusion on after 10 years, is it better? Is it worse?
Was it some wish-washy answer? Like some of it's good, some of it's bad.
We have completed the first cycle, and we are basically going to. The major events are going to start all over again, or maybe more accurately, be undone for the next 10 years. So a lot of the early news stories were covering things like atheists suing to avoid discrimination issues and religious religion getting pushed in schools and bullshit state legislative laws based on religion. None of that's changed. There was a lot in the early days of wins for gay and LGBT rights, mostly in the courts.
Yeah.
The next 10 years is going to be a lot of losses for gay and trans rights in the courts. So
That's what it looks like.
yeah. The podcast started halfway between Russia's invasion of Georgia and Russia's annexation of Crimea and invasion of eastern Ukraine. We again have Russia doing a full-scale war in Ukraine.
So if you just hang in there for 10 years, you'll get relevant again.
Yeah.
Hooray for consistency.
Oh, and we have one viewer.
Oh, yay.
All right, so now for the rant, excuse me, the main topic. There are elements of history, there's religion, there's almost politics. There's conspiracy and fraud and crazy cult-like behavior.
It sounds like the next Netflix documentary.
This story has it all. The original title I was going to go with, but it made Lauren uncomfortable, was The Great White Taint.
Ugh, I hate that word.
So saturated
Some
white.
people don't like the word moist. I don't like the word taint.
So we're going to be talking about saturated fat and TLDR, the Adventist Church's effect in helping fuck with that.
And the general perception of health in America
Yeah.
and the world.
Yep. So first off,
Which is like, wait, what?
so we're going to go through the real news about this first, then dig into the deep details. So for the basic timeline, in the 1950s, the American Heart Association concluded that saturated fat increased LDL cholesterol, which resulted in hardening of arteries, which caused heart attacks and coronary diseases, cardiac diseases. And the basis for that conclusion was early era studies that were looking at like survey data on how do people eat, and then doing really early lipid profiles to measure their cholesterol levels. And they found that the people who said they ate meat, particularly red meat, had higher LDL cholesterol levels. And there was some correlation that was found between LDL cholesterol and heart attacks.
Okay.
Not solidly proven at that point, ended up being the assumption that was run with. It was the 50s.
Right.
It's
It's amazing how much of our healthcare is basically somebody made an assumption in the 50s and they just ran with it.
Well, and there was a major health crisis with people were living longer, but also having heart attacks and getting diabetes and having a lot of really bad health problems. Like once they took care of pneumonia, there ended up being all of these health problems that came up. And so they had to try to figure out, how do we fix it?
Yeah, they've obviously done a great job with that.
And of course, since
Womp,
then,
womp.
yeah, it's gotten worse. We've reached the point where now a majority of adult males and a full 50% of all U.S. adults either have been diagnosed with, or if they went to the doctor, would be diagnosed with hypertension.
Yeah.
We've reached the point where I believe it's 40% of American adults have diabetes. Around 40% have high cholesterol. Like, it's insane.
So are the measurements skewed, or are American diets just that bad?
American diets are that bad. If you look at every single one of those measures and you compare it to any other country in the world, with a couple of exceptions, they have less diabetes, less heart disease, less heart attacks, and often longer life. For example, people in Germany and Northern Europe consume, on average, more saturated fat than Americans and live longer and have fewer heart problems. If you look at Italy and France, people consume far more carbohydrates than the average American and do fine.
Lots of bread and pasta.
There's a lot of variation, and the Americans just do worse across the board. Well, the 1960s, the American Heart Association came to the rightful confusion that telling people that saturated fat is bad is confusing, and the average American can't make sense of that.
Right. Most people don't even understand what fat really is.
So they simplified it to all fat is bad.
Fat bad. It's like, okay, you can get that.
They're also at that time, and I'm pretty sure we covered it a few years ago. It was reported in the New England Journal of Medicine, I think in 2015. The NPR article I have for it's from 2016. They discovered that the sugar industry had funded the landmark diet study that concluded that fat is bad and sugar is fine. By funded, the more
They bought it.
accurate term was they bribed the researchers to skew the result.
Yep. So all of American produce started to include tons of sugar. I mean, heck, Subway sandwiches, the bread is not considered bread in other parts of the world because it has
Like,
so much sugar in it.
In Europe, yeah. If you look at U.S. history, there's the amount of power that sugar has had. Like, Prohibition largely happened because of, oh no, sorry, that one was salt. Morton Salt Company. Morton Salt Company was behind both the creation of Prohibition and the ending of Prohibition of alcohol. But if you look at sugar, the American oral tobacco has traditionally been loaded up with molasses and allowed to ferment, while European oral tobaccos don't ever touch sugar. The U.S. does.
Of course, you put sugar in
years.
everything.
The trade triangle from the colonial era was slaves from Africa to the Caribbean to make sugar, then ship the sugar to the U.S., where it could be turned into molasses or alcohol, and then shipped back over to Europe. That was a huge amount of how that trade triangle worked. And then manufactured.
One of Idaho's top products is sugar beets.
Yep.
Just sugar.
Part of why the embargo against Cuba is still around is because of Idaho sugar beets.
Yep.
Idaho's representatives and senators do not want Idaho sugar beet market share to be threatened by Cuban sugar, especially since people have an assumption that cane sugar is better than beet sugar, even though
sucrose is sucrose. It doesn't
chemically
matter.
It's identical. Yeah. If you want it brown, you can get it from sugar canes. If you're getting white sugar cane sugar, it's been bleached.
Right.
Sugar beet sugar doesn't require bleaching. So anyway, the sugar industry paid for that. By the time we get to the 90s, there started to be some studies with some weird debate on like margarine's unsaturated fat. Well, they were starting to move back to saturated fat is bad and there are some good fats. And that extended on into the early 2000s. There's good fats and there's bad fats.
Yeah, I remember. Is the egg good for you or bad for you debate, and is fat good or bad?
Yeah.
Good fats, bad fats. What does that mean? It is complicated.
Part of that came from the blue zones, which we'll get into in a little bit, and the recognition that people in the blue zones have a tendency to, at least a fair number of them, use a lot of olive oil, and they live forever. So obviously not all fats are bad. So, and commercially it would be suicide for a large organization to say that polyunsaturated fats are bad, because that's what you get in the grain oils.
Oh, canola oil.
The canola and soybean, and those are huge business in the US. If you're in the rest of the world, not a big deal. But if you're in the U.S., there's a lot of rapeseed that gets turned into canola oil. There's a lot of soybeans that get turned into
I swear half of Idaho is rapeseed. Big swaths of yellow fields. We don't grow a lot of mustard here, so that's all rapeseed.
And the Midwest is even more. So, okay, obviously then, mono unsaturated fats. The other thing that they were saying in the blue zones was a lot of seafood being consumed and fatty fish. They're heavily monounsaturated fats, as is the case with olive oil. And eggs ended up being the debate because, well, eggs are pretty high in saturated fat, so they must be bad. And margarine must be better than
Butter.
because margarine has a lot of polyunsaturated fats and butter is basically pure saturated fat. None of them are pure. Every source of fat has some saturated, some monounsaturated, and some polyunsaturated. The saturated just means how many of the carbon atoms in the molecule are fully bonded to hydrogens and how many have double bonds with carbon and can then, when they get heated up or metabolized, grab onto more oxygens. And become saturated. The saturation refers to the amount of hydrogen on the hydrocarbon chain.
Okay.
Monounsaturated.
Starting to lose me here,
Yeah.
but
So anyway, so then there ended up being some back and forth on is butter better or is margarine better? There ended up being back and forth, like for the last. It's been pretty solid for about the last 10 years that eggs are fine to eat. For the 20 years prior, it was back and forth every couple years. Eggs are bad. Eggs are good. Eggs are bad. Eggs are good.
one part of the egg is good, one part of the egg is bad. It's pretty funny.
It's been pretty heavily, eggs are fine. There have been enough studies that have demonstrated that people who eat eggs tend to weigh less, especially if they eat eggs for breakfast, tend to weigh less than people who have cereal for breakfast. And people who eat eggs tend to not have.
Of course, I think it has less
cholesterol
to
problem.
do with it has less to do with how healthy eggs are and how unhealthy cereal is.
Right. Like
But-
that's a huge factor. We've now reached the point where, because of all the back and forth and just science getting better and it being uncovered that the basis of nutritional science was paid for by the sugar industry, that new science has been done. And if you're looking at studies from the last 2 to 4 years, primarily published in the last 2 years, it is primarily that the data on saturated fats is inconclusive, or they're okay, or even they're protective.
Yeah, I saw a couple saying that saturated fats can have actual benefits for diabetes and stroke risk.
Where all
Jury's
of
still out
this
on that, but
basically ends up, like the most likely reasonable conclusion on all of it is saturated fat naturally found in foods is probably fine. Saturated fat that you're adding to foods is probably not the best. In other words, if you're eating a well-marbled steak, it's probably not a big deal. If you're buttering that steak,
it's delicious though.
it tastes so good. In particular, they found in a lot of the processed milk products, there have trans fats have been found. So trans saturated fats, which there was a whole big thing, 10 years ago on banning trans fats in fast food and other foods. So there are some trans fats in the saturated fats in butter and cream and cheese. So those are probably not good for you. It's pretty solidly conclusive that trans fats are bad. So, okay, limit the dairy fat you add to your food. Otherwise, you're probably okay.
Yeah, focus more on the sugar.
There are links in the show notes. There are, a lot of the links are to articles talking about it. Those articles have further links into studies So across what I have in the show notes, there's about 12 studies. Um, yeah, it's pretty wild. So why has it taken this long for science to start correcting? Oh, and part of why I looked into this and why we talked about it and ended up resulting in an interesting discussion was my doctor telling me to not worry about fat at all. Period. She said, don't worry about fat, cut carbs. Now, to be clear, uh, I am not suggesting that my doctor's personalized advice after she looked at my lab results and compared them with the lab results from the year before would be generalized advice for anybody, but at least in my case, she looked at my results and said that I needed to cut the carbs and not worry about fat. In the canned notes that went into my chart, it included to watch saturated fat. It was interesting how much of what was in the canned chart notes.
Yeah, they copy and paste all that crap.
It's epic. It is literally a canned comment with a couple fields that you put in specifics or wildcards to auto-populate, or shortcuts to auto-populate. And yeah, you can't have it in the notes that you didn't talk to somebody with high cholesterol about saturated fat, even though she didn't ever mention the word saturated. Actually, no, I think it was the med student that was with her who did mention saturated fat, which was don't worry about it. But so it was interesting and started digging into it. It's like, oh wow, there is a lot of science going on about this right now.
Yeah.
The major organizations like the American Heart Association, the American Medical Association, the American Diabetes Association, the FDA, the CDC, they are starting to soften their language around fat, but they have decades of technical and literary debt that they have to work through and historical legacy. It's hard for old organizations and large organizations to fundamentally make changes in their marketing language.
Yeah.
It takes time. Just like how you can't expect the Catholic Church to change 2,000 years of history or even 500 years of history in a year. That's something that will take, in the case of something as old as the Catholic Church, hundreds of years to make any kind of meaningful change. When it comes to a lot of these organizations, it's going to take years or decades for them to gradually rework it. So when we dig into where do these organizations, what do they recommend that people do? It's healthy diets. And the healthy diets are largely based on the blue zones.
Yeah. Yeah. This is saturated fats. That's saturated fats are fine. This is the cool stuff, though. I like the.
This is where it gets really interesting. So, what is a blue zone? A blue zone is where people live to be really old. Like, statistically, holy crap, how are these people getting that old?
Whole communities, not just a person or two.
The identified blue zones are, let me pull up the link. Sardinia in Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, California, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and Ikaria, Greece. In each of these places, the life expectancy has been found to be about 10 years higher than the national average around them or the human average for developed countries. And these are all developed countries.
Right.
Costa Rica is a recently developed country, but they are a developed country for sure. What they have found with the blue zones is there is some major overlap between all of them, and then there is some overlap between all of them, and then there are some oddities among some of them. So what they all share in common is strong family bonds, no smoking, plant-heavy diet, constant, moderate physical activity, a lot of social engagement, and they all eat legumes, beans.
Okay.
So obviously that must be what it is.
The secret to living forever.
Yeah.
Eat beans.
If you just look at the commonalities between Loma Linda, California, and Okinawa, Japan, high soy consumption, no alcohol, and faith. That's what they've found.
Right, because Loma Linda is famous for
Adventists. If you look at the commonalities between Okinawa, Japan, and Sardinia, Italy, it's empowered women, sunshine, and gardening.
Okay.
If you look at the
Pretty
commonalities
good for that constant, moderate physical activity.
If you look at the commonalities between Sardinia and Loma Linda, it's whole grains, and they are culturally isolated.
Because they're cults?
No,
not
islands.
or islands, yeah.
They are all islands. Peninsulas are in many cases effectively islands, and Loma Linda is an Adventist island in Southern California. It's not an actual island. It is a
cultural,
isolated, insular community. A bunch of these are BS. Japanese people do drink alcohol.
Yeah.
Most Japanese people are not religious.
Yeah.
So saying faith and no alcohol for why people in Okinawa live so long? Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Then they've got some specifics on each one that I won't bother going into. Empowered women in Okinawa, Japan. Does that sound about right for Japanese culture?
Not really, no. Maybe empowered compared to the rest of the country, because Okinawa is like America's Florida. That's where you go to retire. So once you cast off the shackles of family and work, you can go live the life you want to. You're going to go someplace warm where you can go out in the garden. I guess it's a form of empowerment.
Yeah.
But empowered women, that's a weird one. That was a weird, it's like, what does that even mean?
And also notable that they did not include that as with all of them, because they aren't saying the women in Loma Linda are empowered.
They would be in the same way that the women in Okinawa probably are, though.
Okay, so where this is
empowered, what's that even?
Where some of the Blue Zone concept falls apart is, for one, what are you controlling for? And two, is it even accurate?
Right. It's really easy to say, okay, the average age of these areas is high, so therefore they must be doing something right. But they're all rich.
So there's some variation here. Loma Linda is home to Loma Linda University, which is an Adventist medical school, La Sierra University, which is an Adventist university, and the Loma Linda University Medical School, Loma Linda University Medical Center, which is a massive research hospital. The people there are rich.
They're all doctors and nurses.
Doctors, nurses, professors. There are people who do well financially. If you control for socioeconomics, you could easily erase most, if not all, of the blue zoniness of Loma Linda, California, because you'd have to try to control for being upper middle class or upper class. People who are upper middle class and upper class live longer than the lower class and lower middle class. That has always been the case.
Right.
If you look at Okinawa, Japan, that designation was made despite the fact there weren't birth records for any of the people that were being assessed for being so old. Literally, the birth records from before World War II had all been destroyed. They didn't know how old these people were.
Right. They're just going off of what they said that their birthday was, which
Or what somebody else said.
or what somebody told them their birthday was, which could be off by up to 10 years.
Then you add in the official records from the Japanese government. Okinawa has the 24th highest life expectancy across Japanese prefectures.
I mean, they have a lot of prefectures, but that's not special.
No, that's run-of-the-mill Japanese life expectancy. Not special. Now, if you want to talk about special life expectancy, we can look at Japan.
Silkworm farmers of Japan who live to be over 100 years old. That's a thing.
Yeah, like that's worthy of looking at. It's also worthy of looking at the life expectancy of people in Northern Europe that have the best government-run healthcare and some of the happiest lives and also longest life expectancies. Then you also just, when you're dealing with islands, there's also an issue of genetic variation.
Right.
The greatest predictor of how old you will live is how old your grandparents were. If you happen to have a population where you end up having a bunch of old grandparents in an island because they're all, the families in the island are all interbreeding, you can very easily end up getting a small subset of people who happen to have just longer longevity as a genetic trait. And that could easily be the case with Sardinia and Greece. Costa Rica also kind of fits in with Okinawa a little bit of, they are a recently modernized and recently stabilized country. So the accuracy of some of that data.
Right. Are they
could be
measuring the data
questionable.
from natives or expats?
Yeah.
Because Costa Rica is mostly funded by expats now,
Uh-huh.
which are just upper class
Americans.
Americans and Europeans who decided to retire there. So of course they're going to have higher life expectancy. So the whole blue zone thing is obviously just a debunkable myth.
Now, it's also where there is some validity to it, there are some lifestyle commonalities outside of diet that are really fascinating. Like people in these places with for one, they're all subtropical or tropical. Every single one.
Okay. Yeah, it's sunny, it's warm.
It's sunny, it's warm. You can do gardening most of the year, if not all the year. You can go for walks all the year, all year. The summers aren't too oppressively hot for the most part. Air conditioning is a relatively modern thing to be bringing to much of Southern California. Okay, Loma Linda's far enough east in Southern California that it does get pretty freaking hot there in the summer. But the summers tend to be relatively mild in these places. The winters are incredibly mild. Outdoor activities are possible and easy year-round. They all have close-knit insular communities. Loneliness is very unlikely. And if you have a active, thriving community, the chances of getting more people doing things.
Right. Which is kind of a foreign concept right now because everybody's been, hermits for the past couple of years. The idea of going out and being socially engaged is like that was the before times.
People going for hikes with friends to encourage healthy activity, or just going for walks together. Like all of these things are things that happen in these places. They also all have readily available fresh produce year round.
Yeah, but their farmer markets are great.
With the exception of Loma Linda, they also eat a lot of seafood.
Hmm.
These are pescatarian diets, with the exception of Loma Linda, which is primarily vegetarian, with some pescatarian and well, other meat eating peoples in mixed in. So largely plant based, plus this all the seafood you can afford or want to eat.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's
Sounds wonderful.
yeah, it's kind of hard, but it's hard to control for what's going on with that. So then there's the blue zone diets, and there's an attempt currently to create the blue zone diet where you look at all the dietary things that people in the blue zones do. Mostly plant based, lots of fresh produce, lots of beans, maybe some fish. It's really the Mediterranean diet.
Right, we already have a name for that.
It's the Mediterranean diet. It's fresh produce and beans and fish. Very little chicken. You use olive oil if you're going to use oil. That's the Mediterranean diet. There's also the DASH diet and Heart Healthy diet, which interestingly both have their origin in vegetarians have lower blood pressure on average than everybody else, and vegetarians have fewer heart attacks than everybody else. When somebody's talking about vegetarians, they're talking about Adventists.
You're talking about Loma Linda.
And
They're not talking about
specifically California Adventists and Loma Linda
Yeah.
Adventists.
like we've been mostly vegetarian for the past year, but as a result, we ended up getting a lot more carbs,
Mhm.
and so there's certain health aspects suffered as a result. The people in Loma Linda don't do that as much. They're vegetarian, but it's a different kind of vegetarian than what I would consider to be the average American vegetarian.
In part because the supermarket in Loma Linda, there's no meat department at all, and there's very little processed food. It's mostly fresh fruits and veggies.
Yeah.
And the processed foods there tend to be pretty minimally processed, except for the meat substitutes.
Well, yeah.
Those are the major exception, but it's a very different kind of grocery store than what you would find in the average city in the United States. Loma Linda, California also got its first fast food restaurant just a few years ago. They only have one, and it doesn't get that much business.
Yeah.
And they also have salads on the menu and veggie burgers on the menu because they have to actually stay in business there. But not having fast food. If you need a quick bite to eat, most people get fast food. What's fast food? Well, for the most part, it's you look at McDonald's fries. You take potatoes, you bread them, and then you fry them in beef tallow.
Yeah.
Yeah, under no concept of healthy eating is that healthy.
Nope.
And
then it's heavily salt.
Oh yes, way over salt. And in Loma Linda, they just got a McDonald's a few years ago.
Even the healthy alternatives, like the sandwich shops, are on heavily sugared white breads and deli meats that are heavily salted. We don't have options.
And you look at the quick bites to eat in a Adventist college town like Loma Linda, it's whole grain breads with a lot of fresh veggies and some kind of a protein, usually a fake meat, minimally salted protein.
Yeah.
That's your quick bite to eat. It's a lot different than a quick bite to eat anywhere else.
That's funny. I was walking through the grocery store just this morning, and their quick bite to eat area, it was mostly donut holes.
Yeah.
There was no veggies. There was no fruit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, it's no wonder we're fat and lazy and dying of diabetes.
And the other blue zone diet that the like American Heart Association and American Diabetes Association effectively recommend is vegetarian, just straight up vegetarian. If you want to live a long time, eat like they do in Loma Linda.
Okay.
That's the idea.
If you can afford it.
And also,
womp womp.
That you still need a control for everything else.
Yeah, you
you
got.
look at what life is like in Loma Linda. It's Adventists being the best Adventists they can because it's easy to be a good Adventist there.
Yeah.
It's you're constantly moving.
You're whitesome, delightsome, and lots of physical activity, and
Like this is where people are doing chores almost all the time.
I do have to
Like-
give credit to my mom. Even after retirement, she still gets over 10,000 steps a day because she is just puttering around the house all the time. I don't do that, and I should, I guess.
And if you have a big house, you have to clean it more. And if you have the money, you have a bigger house. And then you have to clean the bigger house. And if you're an Adventist, you absolutely have to have your house clean for Sabbath. So by the time the sun goes down on Friday, you have to have the house clean. And to get the house clean, then you have to keep it clean all the time. So you do a little bit of cleaning all the time so it's not as hard to clean on Friday afternoon after you get home from work.
Ugh, growing up for us, it was Saturday morning. It sucked. In the house, top to bottom.
So constant activity and then a hard reset day off every Saturday.
Yeah, like seriously, you don't do it. You unplug, you just
You relax, you go to church, you relax,
you do those fun outdoor activities with your friends and family.
you go for a
It's
walk.
amazing
you
how
hang out
much
with
work
people.
the average person does on their day off.
Yeah.
Stressful work, not the fun going for a hike kind of work, but
Yep.
like, yeah, we don't give ourselves breaks.
So let's look at the rest of this Adventist influence into what goes into the eat like they do in Loma Linda, because there's a lot more that goes into it. James White was obsessed with solitary vice. James White was really one of the main founders of the Adventist Church. Generally, the founders are considered to be James and Ellen White and Joseph Bates. James was effectively the founder. He was the head of the Review and Herald Publishing Association that was keeping the nascent Adventist movement alive until they finally decided to form an actual organization that could own property. And then after Joseph Bates was done playing puppet figure or figurehead president, James actually took over until he died. And like most dictators, he ruled until he died. And it was very handy that by that time he'd married the prophet who could have visions to back up everything he said. One of his primary obsessions was solitary vice, just masturbation.
Oh, mine would be binge eating.
Uh,
Everybody's got a solitary vice of their own. I was like, no, mine's definitely probably sugar related.
his wife had a health message that, of course, she was severely brain damaged, traumatic brain injury, and having visions as a result. It's really quite tragic, but she was being taken advantage of by James and Bates and various other people around the church. And so the health message had an element of back to Eden, as in back to the Garden of Eden, and an element of what was going around in the health movements of the era. So no strong drink. That includes all alcohol, coffee, tea,
Alcohol and caffeinated.
alcohol and coffee.
Yeah.
No tobacco, no other drugs, which at that time, everything was legal.
Right.
So no opium, no cocaine, or coca leaves. No seasoning or salt.
Killing me here. Okay.
And if you can, be vegetarian. If you are really sanctified, as in the Holy Spirit has really worked in you and made you perfect, you're vegan. And but if you're not that good, then you
I
can.
like how they admit that being vegetarian is harder than giving up seasoning.
Yeah. And if you can't go that far though, then it's okay if you just eat the clean meats. So beef, turkey, chicken, fish that have scales and fins. Uh, those were okay, but discouraged. Vegetarian was encouraged, and vegan was applauded. Then comes John Harvey Kellogg, who was a Adventist until they kicked him out for becoming a pantheist. And he ran the Battle Creek Sanitarium, which was a like health spa center that the rich and famous of the U.S. went to. We're talking presidents, senators, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. Like,
This is the cereal guy, right?
the rich and famous.
Yeah.
No, this is more the
This is the brother of the cereal guy.
the cereal guy was the brother. John was the
Crazy health nut.
crazy health nut
All right.
who believed the core of all problems was sexual urges, and thus you must destroy all sexual urges. He claimed to have never had sex with his wife his entire life, and they adopted 11 children.
Okay.
Did not have any children of their own. They adopted 11.
That automatically makes me assume that he was fiddling the kids. It's like that's just not if you're that repressed.
Yeah. They served only bland vegetarian food, no seasoning, no salt, just bland vegetarian food.
Everything I hate about salads.
So, and that was intentionally designed to suppress sex drives. He created convenience foods that were bland and would repress sex drives, like his form of peanut butter. He was one of possibly three independent inventors of peanut butter. Not the one who invented the kind of peanut butter that people eat.
Because it's disgusting if you literally just crush up peanuts.
Yep. A bland source of protein. He had the idea
Sounds dystopian.
of creating, he invented granola. Not anything anybody would want to eat.
No. Not the good stuff that you can put on top of your yogurt.
No, this was disgusting granola. And then ended up trying to create a dry shelf stable form using crushed up corn, what would become cornflakes. And his brother worked in the kitchen, while John was mostly focused with patrolling the hallways and seeing if any of the rich and famous people there were masturbating, and if they were, taking them to the back room and shocking their genitalia, circumcising them, removing parts of their genitalia, or pouring acid on their genitalia.
People paid for this? Ugh.
Rich people paid a lot of money to go there. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So his brother, on the other hand, wanted to make cornflakes into something that you could actually eat, would want to eat. And John would have nothing to do with it. So his brother left and started the Kellogg cereal company that is now the massive food conglomerate that we all know and love or hate now.
Yeah.
The Kellogg the Kellogg cereal company then went on to invent breakfast, which breakfast prior to that wasn't really a thing in the U.S. If you were hungry, and okay, factory work had started to make breakfast a little more of a thing. So if you woke up and you were hungry before you went to the factory, you'd have some of the leftovers laying on the counter. So dessert or meat that had been sitting out for 10 hours, 10, 12 hours at room temperature. This is before refrigeration. And
Probably mostly bread and cheese.
so he started pushing this these cornflakes as the healthy breakfast. And okay, yeah, less sugar than having cake for breakfast. Probably healthier than having meat that's been sitting out all night for breakfast. And thus created that. The Battle Creek Sanitarium was just one of the many Adventist sanitariums around the U.S. It was the most famous. It also ended up being owned by John Harvey Kellogg, not by the Adventist Church. They were very careful to make sure all the others were owned by the Adventist Church.
Yeah.
Because when they kicked him out, he kept the sanitarium.
Oh, okay.
Loma Linda University. Well, all of the so basically every Adventist college that was created was paired with a sanitarium. So Walla Walla College in southeastern Washington, where I went to school, it's now Walla Walla University. They changed the name like the year after I graduated. And when they started out, it was 3 wings. One side was 2 wings and then the center section. One wing was the women's dormitory, one wing was the men's dormitory, and the center section had classrooms up top and the sanitarium in the bottom. And these sanitariums became hospitals. That one became Walla Walla General Hospital that has recently been shut down. The one in Southern California became Loma Linda University Medical Center and has a medical school with it. Basically, every Adventist college started out with a nursing program, and they pretty much all still have them to staff these hospitals. And they all still have nursing programs to staff these hospitals. Loma Linda has the medical school to staff the hospitals as well. And because it's also a research hospital and university, they've been doing for years Adventist health studies, which look at how are Adventists so much healthier than everybody else.
Look how great we are. Let's show you how to be like us.
Their conclusions are Adventists in California men live 7 years longer than the average American man, and women live 4.5 years longer than the average American woman. If it's a California Adventist who is vegetarian, tack on a couple extra years on that. It gets closer to 10 years extra lifespan.
So you're looking more in the 80s versus the 70s.
80s to 90 versus 70s to 80s. Yeah. And what nobody accounts for in this, like realistically, the heart healthy diet, the DASH diet, all of the diets that are being recommended by the top bodies in the country are all based on the Loma Linda diet. And
it's just as bad as the sugar industry paying off studies.
And it doesn't control for any of the other factors like the community.
Maybe
climate,
it's the religion.
The
Derp derp.
the community, the climate, the
socioeconomic status,
the education level, the abstention from alcohol, tobacco, and even coffee, and all drugs. Like those are all factors. The access to some of the best supermarkets in the world for access to better foods, not necessarily easier foods. The lack of access to the unhealthy stuff, those all make a difference.
Yeah.
And none of those studies.
If anybody should be taking lessons out of Loma Linda, it's the grocery stores.
Yeah. Maybe not take out the meat department, but.
No, but focus less on fast and easy and more on beneficial.
Agreed. Absolutely. So that is
No lip twitching this time, but
No. It is. Yeah, those diets, they're all based on Loma Linda. The Loma Linda studies have helped make these organizations more resistant to any changes. So it starts with fraud, and then you have these Loma Linda studies saying, yeah, but if you want the best lifespan, look at these people. Who are the Americans that live the longest? It's these people, and it's an identifiable group. And if you just try to distill one part of the culture, you don't have it.
no. Too many variables.
There is so much at play. And when you also take into account how many doctors that Loma Linda puts out, how many of the people working on these diet plans are Adventist?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Hey, how many of you see somebody who was turned out of one of these medical universities? Not to say that they're illegitimate doctors, but you got to be aware of the bias.
Yeah.
And especially with some of the recent research coming out on saturated fats, if your doctor starts giving you the same old spiel, you got to be willing to maybe speak up about it if it makes you uncomfortable.
Yep.
If you're okay going vegetarian, go vegetarian. Sure, it's not going to hurt you at all, unless it does.
Pay attention to your blood work, and if it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. But yeah, it's crazy how the writings of somebody with a traumatic brain injury getting taken advantage of by terrible people are continuing to shape the guidance of the major medical associations.
And there is a part of me is like, well, it can't be any worse than what we've got, than what we have had for the past 6 years, because we're screwed. We got a whole lot of overweight, diabetic, pre-diabetic, heart attack risk. Something's got to change.
Yeah.
Because all of us have that anxiety of our impending mortality nestled in the back of our heads as we age. So, but yeah, fun.
Yep.
You can always find religion in any topic.
Oh yeah. So that is all right, so we got some well wishes from Aaron from Interesting If True, from Joel from the Florida News Podcast.
Woohoo!
That is the Old Floridaman Podcast. Well, Joel from the Old Floridaman Podcast back doing a Florida Man News. It is awesome. Go check it out. Just started up again. I highly recommend it. Check out, Florida Man News Podcast. And also from Dude Man Deuce on Discord. So thank you all. 10 years. It's crazy. I did not expect when I started podcasting that I would still be podcasting 10 years later.
No, especially once you got married and had a kid.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be the death knell. Nope, you've kept it up.
And to be completely honest, that's because of our patrons.
Yeah.
When we had a kid, I couldn't quit podcasting because we needed the Patreon money to pay the bills. And we're doing a little bit better now. We're a little more comfortable, but that money is still really nice.
Well, yeah, it pays for the podcast. So
it pays for the podcast, and it pays for it. We have a fair bit left over afterwards, and it's awesome. And it literally has kept this show going. Been rebranded. It's gone through changes of co-hosts. It's gone through changes of format, but 10 years.
congratulations.
And remember, not all those who wander are lost. Sounds good.